Elena Brooks never imagined life could feel this hard. Day after day she worked from morning until late evening, then picked up her little girl from the sitter and returned to a room barely big enough to stretch her legs. The place always smelled faintly of damp plaster, and this summer's heat made sweat roll down her spine the second she opened her eyes. She juggled 2 jobs, mornings spent waiting tables at a coffee shop near the train station, nights scrubbing floors at an insurance office downtown. And still the money never stretched far enough. Rent, milk, cold medicine, preschool fees. It all stacked up like waves crashing over a fragile seawall. "Why am I always chasing something I can't catch?" Elena whispered as she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the worn soles of her cheap sneakers. In the tangled blankets, 6-year-old Sophie slept peacefully, her arms wrapped around a frayed old teddy bear, the only toy left from a happier time. The next morning, they shared half a stale sandwich for breakfast. While Sophie ate in silence, blowing on her piece like it was hot soup, Elena scrolled through job listings on her phone. Most were exhausting, low-paying, and demanded hours she didn't have. But then one line made her stop. Live-in childcare position, high pay, discretion and kindness required. Immediate start. Elena looked at Sophie, who was still earnestly blowing on her sandwich, her face serious like a little grown-up. A live-in job meant no rent, no utility bills. The thought made Elena's heart thump just a little faster. "Maybe," she whispered and tapped apply. The next morning, Elena stood before the tall iron gate marked Hale Residence, her fingers curled around a cold metal handle. The house loomed behind a line of ancient maple trees, tall, symmetrical, and eerily still. Huge glass windows glinted in the autumn sun, but inside, everything looked dark, silent, and empty. She tightened her grip on her worn leather purse and took a deep breath. This was her first time stepping into the world of those who had everything, while she came with nothing but a faded blue dress and a fragile hope for her daughter's future. The door opened before she could ring the bell. A tall, older woman with a severe bun and sharp eyes met her on the front step. "Ms. Brooks?" "Elena Brooks, yes. I'm here for the interview." The woman gave a curt nod and turned. "I'm Mrs. Keller, the housekeeper. Mr. Hale is waiting for you in the library." Inside, the house felt like a museum, silent, polished, lifeless. Gleaming wood floors, perfectly aligned paintings, leather chairs without a single crease. But no sounds, no laughter, no music, not even the patter of a child's feet. Jonathan Hale stood with his back to the window as Elena entered the library. The backlight shimmered against his dark, silver-flecked hair like mist at dusk. When he turned, his eyes were cool, sharp, unreadable. "You're a single mother?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, I have a daughter, Sophie. She's 6. "And you want both of you to live here?" Elena swallowed. "I believe that having another child around might help your son feel less alone." Jonathan sat down, unsmiling. "Elliot, 8, hasn't spoken since his mother passed. We've tried therapy, specialists, classroom aides, all failed." Elena straightened. "I'm not a specialist, Mr. Hale, but I am a mother. And sometimes children don't need fixing. They just need someone to sit beside them and stay." Something flickered in his eyes, a crack, small but sudden, in the emotional armor he wore like a second skin. "You may meet him," he said at last, "but if he turns away like he did with the others, there's nothing more to discuss." Elliot's room sat at the end of the hall. Sunlight poured in, but the space felt hollow. The boy sat on the floor, carefully stacking wooden blocks into a tall tower. Sophie stood a few steps away, hugging her teddy bear, watching intently. No one spoke, but then Elliot paused, glanced sideways at Sophie. His gaze held no fear, only curiosity. Sophie smiled and extended her bear toward him. "Do you have a stuffed friend?" she asked gently. Elliot didn't answer, but he reached into a basket and pulled out a small gray plush cat, setting it beside Sophie's bear. Jonathan watched from the doorway, his eyes lingering on the scene. Then he turned to Elena. "We can try." The first few days at the Hale residence felt like walking across cold tiles. Elena moved cautiously, Sophie treaded lightly, and Elliot drifted like a silent shadow. The house was so big, even footsteps echoed. But bit by bit, the silence began to shift. That first evening, Elena was reading to Sophie in the sitting room. Elliot sat a few feet away, holding his plush cat. He didn't look directly at them, but his eyes flicked towards Sophie now and then, especially when she giggled. Sophie, in her 6-year-old innocence, wasn't fazed by Elliot's silence. If anything, she treated him like a familiar playmate, chatting endlessly whether he answered or not. "Do you like dragon stories? I love the ones with wings, but Mom says real dragons probably couldn't fly." Elliot said nothing, but his gaze lingered on the page with the green dragon. The next morning, Elena made pancakes for the kids. Sophie was first to arrive in the kitchen, still in her unicorn pajamas. She helped set the table, then called out, "Elliot, breakfast ready. There's syrup and peanut butter, too." Elena didn't expect a response, but moments later, Elliot appeared in the doorway, barefoot, still clutching his stuffed cat. He sat across from Sophie, didn't speak, just looked at the plate and started eating. No one said a word. After breakfast, Sophie pulled out a set of colored Legos and sat in the living room, piecing them together. "I'm building a spaceship. Want to help?" Elliot hesitated, then slowly sat across from her. Without a single word, they began building, one brick at a time. And so it went. Day by day, the two children became a quiet little team. Elliot still didn't speak, but Sophie always seemed to know what he needed. When he slid a sketch across the table, she'd say, "You want me to add wings to the dragon? Got it." Elena watched it all unfold, her heart swelling every time Elliot gave a small nod or the faintest smile. She didn't interfere, didn't push. She simply made space for both of them to be who they were. One afternoon, the power went out during a storm. Sophie pulled blankets into the center of the living room. "We're making a fortress. Elliot, you hold the other side." Elliot didn't answer, but stood, grabbed a chair, and helped construct a tented ceiling of linen and pillows. They lay inside with flashlights, each holding their own. Elena stayed back, watching. It was only when Sophie whispered, "It feels like a real home in here, doesn't it?" that Elliot turned to her, eyes shining, and nodded. That night, as Elena tucked Sophie into bed, she asked softly, "Do you like it here?" Sophie yawned and nodded. "Because Elliot's here." Elena smiled. "You know he doesn't talk, right?" "That's okay, Mom. We still understand each other." "How?" "He draws, I guess." Sophie shrugged. "It's like a guessing game, but we don't have to win. Just laugh." A few days later, Elena found a note stuck to the fridge. It was a crayon drawing, a smiling girl, a boy holding a plush cat, and below it, the word scrawled in block letters, "Team." Elena kept the drawing like it was made of gold. Before Elena and Sophie arrived, the Hale house resembled a beautiful but frozen museum. The white sofas bore no marks. The glossy wood floors never echoed with laughter or running feet, and the fridge contained little more than bottled water and takeout containers. But within 2 weeks, small changes crept in, quiet but unmistakable. The first drawing by Sophie and Elliot was stuck to the fridge door with animal-shaped magnets. The kitchen began to smell like warm muffins in the afternoons. Windows once shuttered tight now let in sunlight, and with it the soft hum of children giggling over crayons or Lego forts. Elena didn't try to change anything. She simply did what she always had. put fresh flowers on the dining table, played soft music while cooking, let Sophie tape her drawings wherever she pleased. And somehow, those little things breathed life into the house. One evening, Jonathan walked into the kitchen, still in his buttoned-up shirt. Elena was stirring vegetables on the stove, Sophie teaching Elliot how to fold paper hats from newspaper. Both children were laughing, softly but freely. Jonathan paused at the doorway, his eyes softening in a way Elena had never seen. "I haven't seen him laugh like that since Caroline died," he murmured. Elena didn't reply. She just looked at Elliot, tilting his head at Sophie's paper hat. It was real laughter, unguarded and pure. That night, for the first time, all four of them ate dinner together. Jonathan, who usually ate alone in his library, sat at the table. He listened as Sophie described being chased by a bird in the park, occasionally glancing at Elliot, not waiting for him to speak, just quietly reading his expressions. After the kids went to bed, Elena washed dishes while Jonathan leaned in the kitchen doorway, sipping tea. "You make things easier to breathe," he said. "We're just two girls trying to survive," Elena replied with a soft smile. "No one ever expected us to belong anywhere." "But you do belong," Jonathan said, finally letting the gratitude in his voice show. "To Elliot, to me." Elena paused. "I never thought I could belong to anyone after being pushed out for so long." He set his cup down. "I'm not good at emotions. I try to keep everything intact, even when I know it's broken." But then Sophie came blowing in like a storm, and Elliot started to move. "It's not me," Elena whispered. "It's them. They chose each other. But you gave them the space to choose." She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. And in the warm glow of the kitchen, they stood side by side. Two people who'd been exhausted by life, now quietly anchoring one another in a moment of stillness. Vivian Hale arrived on a quiet Saturday morning, unannounced, unapologetic. The door opened to the chill of judgment. She was Caroline's older sister, and she had never accepted her sibling's absence as something the world should simply move on from. Elena was making breakfast when she heard the sharp click of heels against hardwood. Sophie and Elliot were coloring at the dining table, both freezing as the unfamiliar woman walked in. "And this is—" Vivian's eyes raked over Elena from head to toe. "Elena Brooks," Jonathan said, entering the room. "She's helping around the house. Lives here with her daughter, Sophie." "Helping? Living here?" Vivian's tone dripped with disdain. "And Elliot?" Jonathan kept his voice even. "He's making progress. Elena is part of that." "Of course." Vivian's gaze dropped to Sophie, then Elliot. "It's easy to replace someone when another just slips into place." The words hung in the air like poison. Elena clenched her hands, but said nothing. A few days later, a representative from Child Protective Services, CPS, knocked on their door. An anonymous report had been filed, questioning the appropriateness of the living environment for Elliot. Elena felt her stomach drop. "Inappropriate," the caseworker clarified. There were concerns that Elena wasn't qualified to care for children and that her relationship with Jonathan was creating role confusion. Jonathan's voice was sharp. "Who filed this?" "I'm afraid that's confidential. This is standard procedure. Elliot and Sophie will need to be interviewed separately. We'll also assess the home." The house, once warm, turned cold and strained. Elena tried to stay composed in front of Sophie, but her hands trembled as she washed dishes. Sophie, though young, felt her mother's unease. Elliot withdrew again, less drawing, less connection. Jonathan reassured them both. "We'll get through this. CPS just needs to see the truth." But truth didn't always win. Vivian returned a week later with a lawyer. She filed a petition for temporary guardianship of Elliot, claiming that biological family offers better emotional stability for a traumatized child. Elena stood beside Jonathan as he received the court notice, her eyes locked on one line. Elena Brooks may be required to vacate the residence if found detrimental to the child's well-being. That night, Sophie clung to her mother in sleep, while Elliot quietly slipped a note under Elena's door. Just one word: scared. Elena held the paper, tears falling silently. She climbed into bed beside Sophie and whispered, "No one's going to take us away from each other, sweetheart. I promise." The days before the hearing dragged on like slow, heavy fog. The house, once humming with giggles and the scratch of crayons, was now blanketed in quiet tension. Elena still cooked, still folded laundry, still tried to hum little tunes to keep Sophie at ease. Jonathan buried himself in legal files and psychological records until late each night. Sophie told her usual stories, divided her cookies, tried to act like everything was okay. But it wasn't. Elliot, once so willing to build, draw, laugh in silence, had pulled inward again. No more coloring, no more forts. He simply stayed near Sophie, like a leaf shadowing the wind. One night before the hearing, as Elena was folding Sophie's pajamas, Elliot appeared at the door. She looked up, gentle. "Do you need something, Elliot?" He didn't answer. He only held out a folded piece of paper, his hands shaking. Elena took it, carefully unfolding it. The handwriting was messy, uneven, blotched with tiny eraser marks, but every word struck like a soft blade. "My name is Elliot Hale. I don't talk, but I know what I want. I want to stay with Dad, and Sophie, and Miss Elena. I am not afraid here. This is my home. Please don't take me away." When she looked up, Elliot's eyes were wet. Elena knelt, pulling him into her arms. He stiffened, then slowly leaned in. His head rested on her shoulder, his small frame trembling. No words passed. None were needed. The courtroom the next morning was still and cold. Jonathan sat beside Elliot, Elena beside Sophie, Vivian across from them, stern and unmoved. The guardian, Mrs. Judith Lang, presented her report to the judge. Elliot had made significant emotional progress since Elena and Sophie moved in. He showed consistent engagement, even if silent. The bond with Sophie was crucial to his recovery. The current environment was emotionally nurturing and safe. Then she handed over a folded letter. "Elliot hasn't spoken in nearly 2 years," Judith said gently. But when he learned he might be separated from this family, he wrote this. "I believe the court should hear from him," in his own words. The judge opened the letter. The room fell silent as he read. Jonathan's eyes never left his son. Elena held Sophie's hand tighter, and suddenly, Elliot shifted forward. A sound. A word. "I want to stay with Dad." Jonathan blinked. "What did you say, son?" Elliot looked up, voice trembling, raw from disuse. "I want to be with Dad, and Sophie, and Miss Elena." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Vivian froze. Elena covered her mouth, tears running freely. Sophie only smiled, softly, knowingly, as if she had always believed he would speak. The judge lowered the letter, his eyes tender. "Elliot, thank you. You didn't need many words. You said everything." Then he spoke the ruling. The court denies the guardianship petition filed by Vivian Hale. Elliot will remain in the care of his biological father and those currently supporting him. No applause, only breath held, then exhaled. Elliot turned to Sophie, leaned close, and whispered just one word. Home. One word, just one. But it meant everything. A week after the hearing, a letter arrived from Child Protective Services. It read, "No findings of harm. All current household members are contributing positively to the emotional recovery of Elliot Hale." At the end was an official apology for the unnecessary disruption. Elena folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, the one where she kept her most important things, a few baby photos of Sophie, a handmade birthday card, and now, Elliot's letter. That morning, Jonathan walked into the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Elena and said, "You don't need to be the housekeeper anymore." Elena raised an eyebrow, unsure, but he continued, "I mean, you don't have to work to stay here. I want you to choose to stay, not for a job, but for us." The words stopped everything inside her. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. Jonathan looked at her, his voice softer than ever. "Family is who chooses to stay, not because of blood, but because they can't imagine life without each other." Elena nodded slowly, saying nothing. She held the coffee cup like she was holding something delicate and precious. In the living room, Sophie and Elliot sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring. Elliot had begun speaking more. Simple words, slow but clear. "This is Mom," Elliot said, pointing to a drawing of a woman with long hair. "And this is Dad, this is Sophie, and this is me." Elena knelt beside him and looked. In the drawing, all 4 of them stood beneath a yellow rooftop, next to a tall tree with a swing. Across the roof, Elliot had written in bold letters, "My home." That evening, as the sun set, the 4 of them sat on the front porch, each with a mug of hot cocoa. There wasn't much talking. Sophie's laughter rang out as Elliot told his first ever knock-knock joke. Jonathan shook his head, pretending not to understand, but the smile on his face gave him away. Elena watched it all, the glow of the porch light, the sound of children's voices, the warmth of the people beside her, and knew that, for the first time in years, she had finally found a real home. Spring brought its first soft light, spilling gently into the kitchen, where Sophie twirled around the table, whispering secrets into Elliot's ear. "Don't tell Mom, okay? It's a surprise." Elliot nodded solemnly, lips sealed. Elena stepped in, raising an eyebrow. "What are you 2 plotting?" "Nothing," Sophie chirped. "But you do need to wear your prettiest dress today, and maybe some lipstick." Elena laughed, puzzled but charmed. That afternoon, she stepped into the backyard and stopped. Jonathan stood beneath the old maple tree, sunlight flickering through the branches. Sophie and Elliot stood beside him, hand in hand, both dressed up, Sophie in a white dress, Elliot in a tiny button-up and bow tie. Jonathan walked toward her with a small velvet box. "Elena," he said, voice trembling slightly, "I don't have grand speeches, just this. I've found what matters most because of you." Sophie gently nudged Elliot forward. The boy, his small hands steady, opened the velvet box with care. The silver ring inside shimmered, the exact hue of Elena's eyes. Elena's breath caught. Looking at the 2 children, standing with wide eyes and hopeful hearts, she realized this wasn't just a proposal from Jonathan. It was a proposal from all 3 of them. "Elena Brooks," Jonathan whispered, "will you marry me?" She looked at the children's faces, eyes wide with love and hope. Her heart swelled. She nodded. "Yes, I will." Sophie shrieked with joy. Elliot threw his arms around Jonathan's leg, smiling brighter than ever. The wedding was held a month later in the sunlit garden. Fairy lights strung across the trees, wildflowers in mason jars, laughter in the air. Elena wore a soft white gown. Jonathan wore a yellow tie. Sophie's choice. Sophie was the flower girl. Elliot, the ring bearer. They walked hand in hand, reminding everyone, love sometimes starts in the quiet spaces between 2 children. But before the ceremony began, a car pulled up quietly. From it stepped Vivian Hale. Elena froze. Vivian approached, slower than usual, her voice softer. "I wasn't going to come, but Elliot sent me something." She unfolded a crayon drawing, Jonathan, Elena, Sophie, Elliot. Above them, "My real family." "I was wrong," Vivian said, eyes wet. I tried to keep control because I'd already lost my sister. But Elliot, he chose love. You gave him that? I'm sorry, Elena." A long silence followed. Then Elena nodded. "We've all been hurting, but Elliot deserves love, not custody battles." Vivian smiled faintly. "Thank you for forgiving me and for loving him." She didn't stay for the whole wedding, but before leaving, she bent down and hugged Elliot. He didn't speak, just hugged her tightly. As the sun dipped low, Elena and Jonathan exchanged vows. She promised to be the safe place they could always return to. He vowed to protect their home through storms and sunlight alike. Under string lights, they danced. Sophie and Elliot spun circles nearby, giggling as Elliot stepped on her toes. "I'll protect you," he said. "We're a team, always," she replied. Weeks had passed since the wedding, and the rhythm of their new life slowly settled in. The children had found comfort in routine, shared breakfasts, quiet evenings of reading, and a backyard that now echoed with laughter instead of silence. Elena had begun to breathe a little easier, her heart no longer constantly braced for the next storm. But then something changed. Everything began on an early autumn morning. Elena felt unusually tired, not the kind that comes from lack of sleep, but a strange heaviness in her chest, as if her heart was carrying a gentle secret. Jonathan drove her to the clinic after she softly said, "I think I should get checked." When the doctor smiled and turned the ultrasound screen toward them, Elena held her breath. Jonathan gripped her hand tightly. "Congratulations," the doctor said. "2 heartbeats, twins." Elena turned to Jonathan, her wide eyes filled with tears. He was silent for a second, then burst into laughter, cupping her face and whispering, "We're going to have 2 more." The joyful news filled their home with sweetness. Sophie and Elliot bounced with excitement when they heard. "Really? 2 babies? I get to be a big sister," Sophie squealed, eyes sparkling like stars. Elliot said nothing, but that night he drew a picture, Elena with a round belly, and inside it, 2 smiling hearts. From that day on, the kids never left their mother's belly alone. Every morning began with Sophie pressing her ear to Elena's belly and whispering, "Good morning, baby number 1. Good morning, baby number 2. Elliot would gently rub her belly, then glance up at Elena with a quiet smile. He didn't say much, but his soft hum said everything. Jonathan cared for Elena like she was the most precious thing in the world. He learned to cook special soup for pregnant women, swapped her shoes for flats, added pillows every night, and massaged her back when she was tired. Elena often lay on the couch, her belly growing, eyes gazing at the 3 of them, and her heart would melt. This wasn't just a home anymore. It was something magical. At night, instead of Elena telling bedtime stories, Sophie and Elliot took turns reading to the babies in her belly. Some nights Elliot read in a soft voice and Sophie sang lullabies. Other times they competed over who told the better Little Bear story. Elena would just lie there, hand on her belly, eyes glistening with happiness. Then, on a bright summer morning, Elena went into labor. Jonathan stayed by her side the entire time, not leaving for a second. Sophie and Elliot sat in the hallway, holding hands, visibly anxious. The first cry echoed, clear and strong. Then another followed, softer but full of life. 2 baby girls, healthy, eyes wide open, as if already searching the world. Jonathan stepped out, tears rolling down his face for the first time in front of the kids. He wrapped his arms around Sophie and Elliot and whispered, "You're a big sister now, and you're a big brother." Elena was wheeled into her room, the 2 little angels beside her, skin soft as flower petals, breathing steadily. She looked up to see Jonathan cradling 1 baby, while Sophie and Elliot stood side by side, hands clasped tightly. In the days that followed, the house glowed with a quiet, sacred calm. Elena rested with the babies while Jonathan took over meals and middle-of-the-night diaper changes. Sophie and Elliot moved gently around the house, like little guardians, whispering whenever they passed the crib. The rhythm of their days changed, not rushed, not loud, just full. Every breath felt like a miracle. Every coo, every yawn from the twins, every small giggle from Sophie or glance from Elliot seemed to echo the same truth. This is what healing looks like. A week later, the whole family gathered beneath the familiar maple tree. Elliot cradled one baby, Sophie held the other, gently rocking them as if they'd been doing it forever. "We'll always protect them just like we've protected each other," Sophie whispered. Elliot nodded. "We're a family. No one gets left behind." Jonathan sat beside Elena, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I used to think I'd lost everything. Then you came, Sophie came," Elliot found his voice, "and now," he looked at the two sleeping babies, "we have a whole little world." Elena nodded, eyes misty. On the grass, Sophie and Elliot gently placed the twins side by side, their tiny faces touching, peaceful as an eternal summer painting. Their family, imperfect, quiet, was real. A home where love didn't require blood, only trust, forgiveness, and hearts willing to stay for one another.